Da, 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 da. How did I get a job on Broadway? Let's talk about it. Hey friends, if you are new here, my name is Katharine Quinn and I am a 30-something living in New York City and working on Broadway. I'm actually working on my 5th Broadway show right now, which is absolutely bananas. The shows that I've worked on are Tootsie, Shucked, How to Dance in Ohio, The Great Gatsby, and The Roommate. And I've had different roles on all of them. So I'm gonna tell you how I landed a job on Broadway, if I've ended up in the job I thought I was gonna end up in on Broadway. Spoiler, the answer is no. And some advice for anyone who might wanna work on Broadway now or in the future. Let's get into it. A little background. I grew up singing, dancing, playing piano, doing all of the things. I was always in a musical in high school. I was never the lead in a High School Musical. I didn't go to college to pursue performing until about halfway through college. I was like, wait a second, I want to pursue the stage. And I ended up getting my BFA smushed into 2 years, and I had a split emphasis in playwriting and directing. I still took BFA acting classes, all of that jazz. And all that jazz. So for what it's worth, long story short, I had no plans of working in theater at all. It was not what I thought was going to happen. I have always been very, very, very passionate about theater. The story goes, some family friends and I went to Galveston. We were there for the beach, but there was a hurricane. There was nothing to do. My friend and I were 4 years old. Our little siblings were like 2 years old. What do you do with toddlers? You see what videos are available, because this was the 90s. The only videos available were Hello Dolly and My Fair Lady, and they put in Hello Dolly. And they were like, maybe it'll be background noise. The children might watch 2 seconds and then run around. And legend has it, tiny baby Katharine sat in front, crisscross applesauce of the TV, mesmerized for the entirety of Hello Dolly. And then they put in My Fair Lady and she stayed, mesmerized for the entirety of My Fair Lady. And that is how I fell in love with musical theater. I grew up seeing every show imaginable, all that stuff. So my love started early, my pursuit started late. Went to drama school. I don't think that part is necessary to work on Broadway, just for what it's worth, so if you have it, don't lose me. This part was a surprise to me. I was not planning on having a performing career, it just sort of happened. I auditioned, it was more straightforward than trying to get a job as a director, as a 21-year-old to be taken seriously as a director. Leading a show, getting a job as an actor felt more straightforward. You go to an audition, you sing your 16 bars, you go to the dance call, you go to some callbacks, you book the job, you go. So for 8 years after I graduated, I performed all over the world. I worked at Tokyo Disneyland, Disney Cruise Lines, I did a national tour of Seven Brights for Seven Brothers, I worked regionally all over the country, and then I was like, I am done. The year was 2017. I am done with this. Then I was like, I'm ready to direct and choreograph. So if you're a creative interested in directing and choreographing, especially if you're pivoting, I leveraged the relationships that I had as an actor with those theaters. I said, hey, I am directing and choreographing, here are my reels, here's my experience. I assisted, I associated, and then I also got to direct and choreograph pretty much right off the bat because people had worked with me as a swinger dance captain in a leadership capacity, and they trusted me enough to take on a job at their theater, which is amazing. Then 2019, I applied to a program through SDCF, which is the Stage Directors and Choreographers Foundation, which is attached to the Stage Directors and Choreographers Union, SDC. The foundation had an observership program, which still sort of exists. It's a different version of what I did, and you can still apply for it, and I highly, 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 highly recommend it. At the time, you would apply to be a part of an observership class. I don't think this is part of it anymore, but long story short, you apply to be a part of the class. I think they take like 100 people, and then throughout the year, you submit applications to follow, shadow, fellowship underneath a creative, a director, choreographer, or director-choreographer, often on a regional show, sometimes on an off-Broadway show, and then once or twice a year, they have an opportunity for a Broadway show. I made it to the interview process for 3 or 4 different things. None of them panned out, and then it came to Tootsie, the Broadway opportunity. I applied, I interviewed, and I got it, which was crazy. Okay, so the first Broadway show that I had anything to do with was Tootsie in 2019. This won the Best Book of a Musical in 2019. It was nominated for Best Musical, starring Santino Fontana. Regional theaters are now doing it. It's a very funny show. Folks have a lot of trouble with the material for good reason.
No one hates me.
No one likes you.
At any rate, this was my first experience on a Broadway show. I was 29 at the time, which is not really relevant for any reason, but it's just like, it's never too early or too late to pursue things like this. Like, I had had a whole separate career prior to this moment, but if you're in your 30s or 40s, there's still no reason why you can't do something like this if you're pivoting. So I got to do my fellowship with Dennis Jones on Tootsie. He was the choreographer. His choreography is so character-driven, so funny, giant fan of his work. And so I got to shadow him throughout the process. They let me, you know, use the Stage Right software, which is a blocking software. It'll tell you where all the people are in space. So I got to make charts for the show and listen to some of the conversations. And the great thing about being a fly on the wall is you're a fly on the wall and you get to experience the Broadway process. And I heard incredible creative conversations and watched rehearsals and learned so much. I usually sat behind Robert Horn and David Yazbek in the room. So composer and book writer, incredible, and would hear their goofy conversations with each other. Robert is brilliant.
I've been working 35 long years for this, and believe me, what doesn't kill you will try again tomorrow.
Robert also becomes a friend to everyone in the room. Some people sort of stay in their own lane in the room, and not even just stay in their own lane. Some people keep to themselves in the room, in the rehearsal room. Robert gets to know everyone. So we became pals. When we were in tech, there was one moment where Robert looked around and was like, Katharine, you're a woman, come over here. Tootsie was about what it is to be a woman, right? Like, that's part of the conceit of the show, is Michael steps into the shoes of what it would be like to experience the world as a woman. There were not many women on that team. I once counted that there were 40 people in our production meetings and 2 of us were female, and I was just a fellow, so not a ton of representation.
Don't you find being a woman right now complicated?
Right now, extremely.
So Robert asked for my thoughts. I'm not special in this way. Robert is extremely collaborative and he wants everybody's thoughts about everything. But it was still magical for me, of course. So we had this conversation, we sort of like verbally workshopped a scene towards the end of the show and bounced around ideas. And those ideas made it into the show that night. And I was like, oh my God. Not only was it incredible that he was so generous with a fellow for choreography, workshopping that scene was so fun for me. Clarifying story was so fun for me. And usually as a director, you're working with a set piece. You can't change the writing of the show. All you can do is change the approach to clarify. So if there is a hole in the writing, or if there's something that you don't quite understand, you just direct through it. That's the only thing that you can do. The thing that I was like, oh my God, the most about was you could change the words. We were literally changing the script, and Robert is a prolific rewriter. Like, he will come up with a lot of new pages every single day, which is a good thing. So anyway, I learned I didn't want to be a director choreographer on Broadway because a Broadway show is very much a machine, which isn't to say that there's not creativity, but there's so much money on the line, the stakes are so high, and there are so many people involved that it felt like such a far cry from try it and find out of what regional theater can be sometimes if you're afforded a nice longer rehearsal process, like a 4-week process, and the artistic director comes in once or twice for notes, and the rest of the time you sort of get to build this beautiful thing with your humans. It can be that way on Broadway, but it can't really always afford to be that way on Broadway. The stakes are just so high, and you are speaking to producers and investors and directors and. This is not just a reflection of Dennis or the people with him. He is wonderful. It's just a different animal. And so literally that contract taught me that I am still a director choreographer. I directed and choreographed after that show. I did a show earlier this year. Listen, if somebody offered me a directing or choreography gig on Broadway, I would take it, obviously, but I'm not aggressively pursuing that because it isn't my end game. I would rather work artistically in regional theater and commercially on Broadway, which we're gonna get to. So if you're following this timeline, Katharine's a fan. Katharine doesn't go to theater school. Katharine goes to theater school. Katharine becomes an actor. Katharine becomes a director choreographer. That's where we are in this story. Great. And then, of course, the world shuts down. The world shut down. I got my arts administration master's for funsies. This is not required of anything for any reason. What I will say is I had an amazing experience. I got an online MA from the University of Kentucky School of the Arts, School of Fine Arts. I did it in a year and a half and I loved it. It was very choose your own adventure. I got to learn so much about nonprofit structure, development, fundraising, marketing. And then I learned a lot about commercial theater because they allowed me to pursue not just nonprofit theater as like a focus, but also commercial theater, and also the pipeline from nonprofit theater to commercial theater, which I found super, super interesting. This is not required. I actually don't think that formal education is required for any of this. That said, did my BFA acting classes help me with directing? 1,000,000%. Obviously, my directing classes I found very valuable for directing. I had a great professor, so it was great. And then in terms of arts admin MA, Not required for any of it, but I have stayed curious through this whole process. I think that has served me so incredibly well. I've stayed nimble and I've constantly pivoted, and I've kind of like rolled with the times a little bit and rolled with saying yes to whatever is feeling right in that specific moment. And I think that served me so well. So world shuts down, get the MA. And also I started a TikTok account. I fell madly in love with watching Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear create Bridgerton the musical on TikTok. If in case you weren't around, in case you weren't a fan, they literally would compose in real time. And it was a, fan musical, but it's Emily Bear, who's like a prodigious orchestral talent, and then Abigail Barlow, who has amazing pop hooks, etc. And the two of them combined are really, like, for me, lightning in a bottle. I think they're so exciting, so wonderful. I can't wait to produce a musical of theirs someday. I've said that since 2021. It is now 2024. It's going to happen, and I can't wait. Created a TikTok account. Started talking about how much I was loving watching Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear build this musical. Gained like 40,000 followers in a matter of like a couple of weeks. It was bonkers because at that time that was normal on TikTok, kind of. I mean, not normal, but like easier to do than it is now. So then I just started talking about all of my wanderings and musings and all the things about theater that I hoped would be different when it came back. Spoiler, most of those things didn't happen, but we're having ongoing conversations. Change is slow, all that jazz. Broadway comes back. Now I'm making TikToks, and also I'm pursuing being a director choreographer. I got to direct a production of Fun Home. I choreographed Legally Blonde and You're in Town, and I sent a DM on Instagram. So, Tony Award winner Robert Horan. He was the book writer of Tootsie that I did back in 2019 working with a choreographer. I had worked on Hercules in the park, Hercules at the Public Theater when it had 250 people. I'll throw a photo up here. It was incredible, and my charts on Stage Right were insane. I had worked on team choreography for that. He wrote the Paper Mill Playhouse iteration, and I DM'd him when, he posted about that publicly, whatever, and I was like, yay, Hercules family, we love it. Also, if you ever need a writer's assistant, let me know. So we had already had a relationship. This wasn't an ask out of the blue. It had been several years, and he, I guess, DM'd me maybe a week later and was like, hey, what's your number? Gave me a call and said, I have a new show that's coming. I've got a reading that's coming up, and I need a script assistant. Are you interested in this? It's gonna be fast and furious. I write a ton every single day, so it's gonna be a big thing. Have you ever been a writer's assistant? And I said, no, I have not. And he said, do you know Final Draft, the software? And I said, yes, I do. Had never downloaded it before. So boarded my dog, even though I was still in the city, downloaded Final Draft, called on every favor I had who worked in television and theater who knew Final Draft, and was like, hi, talk me through this. What's useful in a writer's assistant? All of that stuff. Like, did the homework quickly in a week. And then I was on this reading. So that reading was of Shucked. Then I went with the show to its out of town. Spoiler alert, I paid for my own housing. They were like, we don't have housing for the writer's assistant. And I was like, bet, I'm going to fund this myself. Now, this is an incredibly privileged thing to do, I guess. Nobody gave me that money, but I used my voiceover money to fund that because I was like, this is an investment in the thing that I am pursuing, and it is going to be worth it to me to continue building these relationships, continue working on this show, etc. So I paid for it. I know that's not advice that I can offer always to other people because that's money. I did negotiate a great deal on an Airbnb. It was reasonable, etc. But still, a lot of this has been pay to play. Like, a lot of my career really has been. So Pioneer happened, great experience. Then it transferred to Broadway, and I stayed on for the Broadway production. On the Broadway production, I was still making TikToks all the time. And I was making all these TikToks that were day in the life of a Broadway, writing associate. My title evolved over time. Talking all about the show, making content sometimes with the actors, and it performed really, really, really well, to the point where I ended up working with our official social media team and providing them some content that I filmed with the actors, etc. And I did Rushline trivia, all this kind of stuff. And it was really great. And every single night at the show, someone would come up to me and say, hi, I'm at the show because I love your content. And the creative team was like, huh, this is different. One of those humans was Jason Howland, who is the music supervisor on Shucked and the composer of The Great Gatsby on Broadway. So worked on Shucked. I cold emailed Sammy Canold simultaneously, and I was about to go out of town to assistant direct a production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory out at Tuacahn. And I said, hey, people in the industry say that we should be friends. You seem like wonderful humans. Can I take you out to a 20-minute coffee? I did not have an ask of her. I just wanted to get to know her because I only want to work with good people in the industry. If I do have a word of advice, it is work with good people. No one is making enough in this business to work with assholes. So you want to work with incredibly kind people. I want to work with great people as well, and a lot of the time there's crossover, but most importantly, I want it to be a pleasant experience because making art is hard and vulnerable, and you want to work with good people. So I'd heard Sammy was great, took her out to coffee, we got coffee, she was like, these are all the amazing things that I'm working on. I was like, fabulous, love it. And of course, How to Dance in Ohio sounds, she, talked about it, I was like, amazing, I am an autistic human. That sounds, yay representation, that's incredible. But it was like a part of a broader conversation. So that conversation happens. I go do the show at Tuacon. I directed and choreographed a production of Footloose. I interviewed for How to Dance in Ohio. Also in the summer, Jason Howland, music supervisor of Shucked, composer of The Great Gatsby, took me to lunch and said, general management / producers don't have a line item or a budget for out-of-town marketing. It's not usually something that happens. For a show that wants to be on Broadway, they usually just rely on whoever the home theater is to do enough of the marketing to make the sales, whatever, and the show identity starts with Broadway. More and more that's starting to change, and I am a giant advocate for that. If I had my druthers, marketing would start on every single show. Like, my relationship starts with a developmental reading. Like, I want to start at the genesis of a show. Low key because I'm kind of producing, and high key because it's going to help the brand of the show. Jason Allen takes me to lunch. He said, I saw what you did on Shucked. I want to give you whatever title in the room, but mostly I want you to market the show. And I did. And I created my business, and that's Showbiz. And I started doing social media for @Gatsby. And I ended up continuing on running social media for Gatsby on Broadway, starting in January. I just started The Roommate on Broadway in July, the end of July. And now I'm in the mix for all kinds of fun things. And it's crazy, and it's incredible. And now I'm working in marketing on Broadway. Let's revisit the timeline. Theater fan, didn't pursue theater. Went to theater school. Actor, director, choreographer, writing assistant, marketing. The moral of the story is say yes. The moral of the story is say yes to things that feel good and no to things that don't, even though it's so hard to say no in this industry. I have said no to one of the marketing agencies on Broadway, benevolently, was like, we see what you're doing. Would you like to head up a new division for us? We'll give you a VP title. And they offered me a perfectly lovely sum of money, like a really lovely sum of money. And I said, no. That was so It was so hard. There are shows that have pitched to me that I have said no to because either I knew I couldn't sell the Kool-Aid of that show or it wasn't the right fit. I have said no to directing shows because they didn't feel like the right fit, even though I really wanted to work at those theaters. It's all been about going with my gut and doing things that I know I'm gonna love, because I have done projects in theater that it's like, oh, I'll suck it up because it'll lead to something else, or I'll whatever, and you hit a point where you can't do that anymore. And I have hit that point and I'm not gonna do that anymore. Working in theater and working on Broadway has been the most unbelievable gift. I'm 35 and I can't imagine what the future holds, because this whole part of my journey really only started in 2019 and we had a whole pandemic in there. Yeah, it's been remarkable. In case you aren't aware, there are like 200 people who work on every single Broadway show. Big musicals might have about 200 people attached. Smaller musicals and plays would have fewer humans, but still, there are 41 Broadway theaters, so there could be up to 41 shows running at any given time. There are a lot of more humans than just the actors on stage. Acting is an incredible job. Performers are superhuman. Those who make it to Broadway are incredible. But it's not the only kind of work that you can do on Broadway. If you flip in the playbill, or even if you go online to playbill.com and look at the inside the playbill, scroll to the staff page. You see all those teensy tiny names in size 8 font that you can barely read. Those are all humans who've been working for months, sometimes years, just for that Broadway show. Some of them work with the theater as well, and there's so many jobs on Broadway. So if you have an interest in working in the business, but you haven't got a theater school, you aren't an actor, or you feel like you don't have any connections, you don't have a ton of expendable income. I did not either. I had the most circuitous path ever to where I am, and I don't think that this is my final destination either. I think that more things are going to start happening and different things will start happening, and it will continue to take a different shape over time. But it's been the best. I've had a life beyond my wildest dreams already, and I'm so grateful. And I'm really about not gatekeeping how that happened and how you can do the same, which is kind of what this whole channel is about. So if you have enjoyed this video, if you would leave a comment asking any questions that you might have, I try to answer as many questions as humanly possible. I actually try to answer all of them. like, subscribe. It makes a huge difference to me as a new YouTube creator. This channel is just over a year old, so it really means a lot to me if you take the time to do that. I invite you to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at It's Katharine Quinn. I post constantly. I am chronically online. Thank you so much for watching. I cannot wait to see your questions in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye!